Well, good afternoon or morning or evening for anyone joining outside of the UK. Thank you for taking some time today to hear about why we feel any move to S4HANA will be a success for your organization if you put security first in your plans. Security underpins everything your users do in SAP, so make sure that they do what they need to and nothing that they shouldn't be able to do when you move to S4HANA. For today's session, we have Mark Jackson on the call, one of our practice directors here at Turnkey. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mark Jackson. I look after Turnkey's integrated risk management practice in the UK. So we help customers derive greater value from their risk management and internal control related functions in support of their business objectives. I've been with Turnkey for 15 years now and operating in the area of security, risk and controls for almost 25 years. So really looking forward to discussing how you can get your S4 migration right first time by adopting a security first approach, and the need to consider also your internal controls as part of your overall security strategy.
Thank you, Mark. And then obviously myself, Chris Haig, an SAP security, technical architect in the application and cyber security space. A bit like Mark, I've been in this arena for 25 years, mainly in the SAP security space. Probably half of that time as an end user at a UK bank and as a global FMCG company. So hopefully I can still consider things from the customer side too. To start with, I'd like to bring us all up to the same level of understanding about the migrations options there are for a move to S4HANA. And I would say it's your session as much as ours. So do pop any questions you might have in the chat window, and we'll hopefully cover those off at the end. So there are three main transition paths to S4HANA. The two of these are clear leaders with almost equal preference as per some recent SAP statistics. These are a new implementation or a greenfield migration, and the system conversion or a brownfield migration. There is a third, selective data transition, which could be considered a muddy greenfield and currently doesn't have that much popularity. So we won't focus too much on that today, but do contact me if you're considering such a transition, or pop a message in the chat window if you have specific queries about that. In fact, as a reminder for any late joiners, if you do have a question, we've got that Q&A session, that window to pop the questions in. We will be sending out a copy of these slides to all attendees after the event, and we'll look to put the Q&A items in too. The key thing with all these approaches is that they need security efforts to be a success, both at the architecture level and the application level. We are focusing on the application level today, but don't forget S4HANA may mean cloud-hosted solutions, mobile end-user access, and a lot of other technical security changes to consider as part of the migration. In the S4 system, every time a user presses enter or clicks on an icon, the authorization concept runs in the background. And what users can and cannot do gets limited or enabled by the authorizations each user has. We get that wrong and there's a heap of pain, but you get it right and you truly enable your use of S4. And whenever we consider the application level security, we need to think about the appropriate controls over the use of the application, which Mark will cover later. So going to those three approaches, the greenfield is a new installation, an opportunity to build your SAP solution afresh. It's usually done with an SI, following the SAP's Activate methodology. It's likely to be at least a year-long journey. It can be more popular on new to SAP customers, but it's often undertaken if things have changed considerably since you started running SAP. You'll have a new landscape of S4HANA systems to work with, whilst maintaining your legacy ECC environment. So you'll have that dual maintenance period, still running the current solution while you build the new solution. Twice the operational security effort for a while, maintaining the old whilst enabling the new. And it really can be that fresh start. Your company's organizational structure might have changed since you first deployed SAP, or the business processes that you want to run could differ, or you want to align them to SAP best practice now. Ideally, as the business processes are being confirmed in the fit to standard sessions of the explore phase of SAP Activate, The necessary apps or transactions to run the process can be considered for new roles. Security design is a key activity during the explore phase, and security implementation a key step in the realize phase. New Fiori content and roles must be set up to enable such an implementation. In fact, throughout Activate, SAP security roles and authorizations need to be involved. Mark will speak more about the controls aspects later, but as it gives you a new system, any system level controls will need to be defined. And do be aware that some reports no longer exist on S4HANA. Brownfield has gained in popularity because it can be quicker to implement, possibly 6 to 12 months, as nothing needs to change. As a customer, your SAP solutions do what you want them to do, so why change them? It's often seen as a technical conversion to get S4HANA working, get you to S4HANA and working. And that's probably due to SAP dropping support for earlier versions of ECC. Your current or old systems get converted to new. Again, you'll most likely have a conversion landscape and your business as usual landscape to allow you to support your current production system until you go live on S4HANA. Because the system gets converted, some of the sins of the past will be present in your new S4HANA system, like obsolete custom code and all your current roles, but only giving you transactional-based access until you adopt Fiori. The key consideration is everything that is still available under S4 will remain in the newly converted system, but might need some tuning to work, which means all the old roles and any current ECC system level controls might need readdressing. It can be a temptation to skip some tasks or delay them until later, but that can be a false economy as you won't be getting the benefit of Fiori from day one. Final option is this hybrid or selective data transition, which is sort of the muddy greenfield. It's a mixture of both approaches. And the important thing is you get all your historic data brought in from your old system, or not all of it, you can choose what you bring in, but you're bringing it into a new S4HANA system, possibly putting in your current organizational structure or a subset of your organizational structure to align how your business now works. It's quite low adoption, as we said, and only available on certain of the S4HANA flavors that are around. The public cloud doesn't really lend itself to the selective data transfer. A lot of the security effort you have on greenfield holds true for the hybrid solution because it can involve fitting your business to SAP standard processes and then securing them. It might be seen sometimes as part of a wider greenfield project. A new environment is built for the main operating concern in an organization, and then some subsidiaries or smaller business units are selectively transitioned in to the greenfield solution. It's quite a unique scenario, but do ask if you need to know more about how this can work. So as greenfield and brownfield migrations are about equal preference, but greenfield tends to be that new implementation, working with a system integrator and the SAP Activate methodology, let's look a little deeper into what brownfield might mean for you. The chances are this is the preferred solution for many customers that are moving to S4HANA. So let's make sure you are aware of the likely effort. We're going to start with some of the myths of greenfield migration, which we hear SIs telling their customers. The first one, it's only lift and shift. We don't want to change too much. And that's true. You might not be looking to review your current business processes. And your intention might be to just have an S4HANA solution that does exactly what the ECC system does. And that may include not adopting Fiori for now. Your organization structures in SAP won't change on a brownfield, nor will the way that most people use SAP. You've effectively changed the engine in the car. But if you don't check your SAP roles during your S4HANA upgrade, you'll have to keep using GUI or transactional-based access. When we do come to look at Fiori access, we can just use the SAP delivered roles. SAP do deliver some templates that you can base your Fiori access on. And you can find this using the Fiori app finder that's on the SAP support portals. They do give you that transactional access and the suggested app access with less effort, but they'll also give you a lot of other access which you might not need. And if you put that in without considering that extra access, you might be exposing your organization to risk, which I'm certain might not want to happen. In some cases, brownfield can be the best approach, but don't think you can reduce your overall project effort when going brownfield by skimping on the security tasks. User access will still need to be reviewed, adjusted, and tested. And getting the Fiori access right can and will help with the controls concerns later. The other thing we often hear is, we'll do Fiori later, which you can. The first S4 project I did on the 1709 release didn't really deploy much in the way of Fiori. But if you don't consider Fiori now, you might have some reworking or retesting later, as well as missing performance improvements from day one on S4HANA. So going into that lift and shift comment, what does that really mean? Well, it is a technical upgrade. It's changing the current operating code to run as the S4HANA code and bringing the system up to that current version. Architecturally, there are changes to what S4 can do now in relation to your other SAP solutions, like BW and SDM, and some functionality moving into S4 and other functionality moving out onto solutions like Ariba, Concur, and SuccessFactors. We often see that organizations have already made those moves, but haven't moved ECC yet. So that means there will be some technology changes in the environment. Taking what we currently have and upgrading or converting it to make it work has considerations for your current ECC roles in S4HANA. Every release of S4 brings new or updated Fiori apps, which can fully replace traditional SAP transactions. Usually the transactions remain, and the customer has the choice of staying with the transaction or adopting a Fiori app, even though transactions are sometimes fully deprecated or more obsolete. If that's the case, you'll have to move to Fiori. Those Fiori apps would need to be made available to your end users in their roles via bringing in some Fiori catalogs, which will mean changing an existing role or creating a new role of that Fiori content to give your users. Even if all the transactions that your users need access to still exist on the release of S4HANA you're moving to, your existing roles will only work in something like the SAP Business Client or SAP GUI until you make it visible in the Fiori Launchpad. If users need any access to several Fiori apps, you run the risk of giving them two ways of accessing functionality, one for Fiori, one for transactions. But you really want to embrace the Fiori Launchpad for apps as soon as possible. The other thing that will be there is your custom code will still be in the converted system. Might need some checking. S4 does have a compatibility mode that lets you run existing custom code in a sort of emulation mode over a virtual ERP6 data model. But longer term, you might want to consider moving that custom code to the SAP Business Technology Platform, BTP. That's got its own security considerations, far more than we can cover this afternoon. I mentioned that SAP delivers the necessary roles. Well, it does. If you want to use best practice processes, the SAP BR roles do give a good starting template, but they are templates. They've got the Fiori content in that you might need to support that best practice business process, but they include far more than the users will need. For example, in sales ordering, we'll find that the key transactions are available for use, but so are 13 other additional transactions, as well as the Fiori app to manage a sales order. And if you're going to use that catalog, why not use the managed sales order app and move away from that transaction? A custom catalog of just what the users need access to will limit what will go into their launchpad and limits the functionality that we'll have to control from a risk viewpoint. Risks in S4HANA are based on what can be included in the launchpad. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I jumped through too many screens there. Yeah, sorry. And remember, with a brownfield or system conversion, you don't have to change those processes. So let's try and focus on what people need access to rather than what the system might offer you. We can do the Fiori work later. This is the commonest thing we hear all the time. If you leave Fiori to later, you'll have to revise your roles then, and you may have missed the boat from the change and training perspective. It's almost like doing your S4 migration twice. Once to get you onto S4HANA, and then a follow-up to start exploiting that new function, that new system. One Fiori app can replace several SAP transactions and alter the way users engage with the system. You need to get those changes in the ways of using SAP embedded into your user processes as early as possible. So change management and training can be engaged to help your staff use S4. You'll have to make the current roles work via the Fiori Launchpad, unless you are keeping the users in the business client or SAP GUI. And make sure you plan that early. Most customers have hated the SAP GUI for many years, so let's embrace this as a catalyst for change. However you're transitioning to S4HANA, security can enable that move. We talked about the greenfield, we talked about brownfield. The main thing is you want roles that fit your processes. If you have up-to-date, well-maintained records of how every process you run on SAP that might not be much work. But how many organizations really know what specific transactions were put into roles 5, 10, 15, or even 20 years ago? Having roles that fit the way you will now run SAP gives you that good solution for giving you that Fiori access to support the processes you run. SAP provides the Fiori app library or SAP Signavio to help you understand which apps can be used. Having the small roles aligned to the steps and the processes you run also helps reduce risk. And so the app library that I just mentioned has functionality to help you review the transactions that have been used, and then you can tune the access that you need. But when it proposes the apps you can use, remember that it is only a proposal. It doesn't actually do any conversion for you. It tells you, you were running this transaction, you now might want to run this Fiori app. It can help you determine which roles need to change, but don't forget, some of the key transactions that you need in a month, quarter, or year end won't be very commonly executed. So don't just tackle the ones that run every day, tackle the ones that you need to use. So the key thing we would say is, once you've got that technical conversion done, start moving to Fiori as soon as possible. It is possible to use the GUI transactions, but you're not exploiting the full power of S4. And because things are changing, you will need to put some controls changes in place, which is probably a good point to hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Chris. If we could just go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So over the next 3 or 4 slides, I'm going to be focusing on the aspect of managing risk, as Chris mentions, and the associated application of internal controls as part of your wider security strategy and approach to your S4 migration. So Chris has been talking about both the brownfield and greenfield migration methodologies, or hybrid, and the associated advantages, disadvantages from a security perspective. However, when considering your ongoing ability to define and monitor access risk, both completely and accurately post-migration, it doesn't actually matter which of the migration methodologies you have adopted as your GRC rule set. It's still going to require some work, some level of work to ensure it's S4HANA ready. So that's a given, and so you need to be aware of that. Now, what do we mean by making it S4HANA ready? Well, let's focus firstly on the technical considerations. These are related to the changes that will need to take place regardless of your migration methodology, and Chris has touched upon some of these already. Due to the technical security related changes in S4HANA, then some of the existing content in your rule sets may no longer be relevant, or there may be new content required in addition to that, which is already there. For example, certain transaction codes and programs have been removed and partially replaced with new transaction codes and programs, such as use of business partner related transactions, for example, for some covering some master data elements. In addition, end users will execute certain activities functions via Fiori apps and related services. So it's these objects which they will need access to, and therefore could contribute to segregation of duties or critical access risks. So these will also need to be identified and reflected in the rule set accordingly in order to enhance the content where applicable. In addition, for those organizations that, despite the S4HANA migration, are still retaining additional ECC systems as part of their wider SAP landscape, then there's decisions to be made about whether to utilize a separate S4HANA rule set for the S4 system and use the original rule set for the rest, or have one overarching global rule set. It's possible to stick with one, and in most cases, that is the preferred option to reduce maintenance and also ease of reporting, etc. So you can simply merge the S4 content alongside the existing ECC content and ensure alignment with the correct logical connector groups. So whatever system you're reporting on, it will be making use of the relevant content. Secondly, there's also some non-technical rule set considerations to make, which are much more reliant upon the actual migration methodology that you do adopt. In particular, if you're taking a greenfield approach, then it's likely you'll be redesigning business processes to achieve greater standardization wherever possible and get the best out of your S4HANA investment. If that's the case, then as part of your BPMLs and business process level sort of 4 documentations, you should be mapping out those key risks associated with those detailed activities, some of which will include access risks related to SOD or sensitive access, and some of these may present new access risks which need to be reflected in your rule set as well. So it's also an opportunity to reevaluate the risk levels for existing access risks, which are still relevant, to ensure that the risks and not just the controls are right-sized and correctly reflect your true business risk. Even if you do adopt a brownfield approach, and so your business processes aren't changing a great deal, if at all, it's still an opportunity to revisit your rule set, as the quality of your risk reporting is dependent on it. And you don't want to be oblivious to those risks which exist in reality but just aren't being measured. And conversely, you don't want risks that are being measured but are wasting your time and energy in dealing with them because they're not a true reflection of your business risk landscape. So a finely tuned rule set will enable you to leverage the risk information so that any risks you are introducing into your roles or assigning to your users is purely by design. And this will help you to strike the fine balance between providing sufficient access for people to do their jobs and carrying that level of risk which you as a business are comfortable with. So it comes down to risk appetite and weighing up both the downside and upside of risk. Better move on to the next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. Internal controls are going to have to be leveraged in some way, shape, or form as part of your overall security strategy. I don't think Chris or I have ever seen a customer that has successfully managed all their risks simply by removing the offending access. It's just not possible, and it shouldn't really be your objective either, as the business will likely come to a grinding halt. If you've adopted a greenfield approach to your migration, then as part of a dedicated internal controls workstream, a sort of root and branch review of your internal control framework should ideally take place related to the business processes, or parts of them at least, that are being performed within the SAP environment. Although business controls that can be leveraged to mitigate access risks are part of that review, it should be a wider exercise than that, considering all the operational risks inherent within your newly designed business processes and the related controls that you already have, or new ones that you might need to design and implement in order to manage those risks to the right level. And this is key, as it's about right-sizing your controls, i.e. not over-investing in control activities, particularly those that aren't considered to be managing key risks. This is the rationalized part, taking stock of what you have and what you actually need. So let's liken your migration to moving house. when you've lived in a house for a long time, inevitably you'll find that you've accumulated lots of stuff that you no longer want or need. It no longer works, some of it, or has been replaced by something newer or better, but you've still retained that old stuff. So you've now got way more stuff than you actually need. So it presents the perfect opportunity to declutter, ensure that the stuff that you're taking with you to your new home is required, it will fit the new house and provides use and value. It should be the same mentality applied to your controls. It's really important that all your controls provide value to the business, as ultimately they should only exist to help you navigate risks appropriately in order to succeed in achieving your business objectives. So controls should be seen as a business enabler rather than the negative connotations typically applied to them. As part of the optimize phase, you're focusing in on how to do things better. So is there an opportunity to strike a healthier balance between the use of manual controls and automated controls, for example? Manual controls always play a role, but you should approach every risk with the opportunity to apply an automated method of operating and or monitoring the required control. As automation provides efficiency, it also reduces the risk of it breaking down due to human error. So are there new system-based controls that you can take advantage of in your S4HANA system, for example? On that point, you also need to be 100% sure that your controls are designed and operating effectively. If you're going to mitigate SOD risks using them, then you need to know that you can rely on them, and you'll only gain those levels of assurance through some form of testing or monitoring. It's certainly something that the auditors will pay attention to, even if you don't. Even with the true brownfield implementation, you'll need to ensure that certain controls you've been relying on for years are still valid in S4 as well. So as Chris mentioned earlier, there may be some reports that no longer exist. There may be some configurable controls equally that don't exist either, or don't operate in the same way as they did in your ECC environment. And that brings me lastly on to governance and your internal control framework, which is a living and breathing thing that requires management. It requires ownership and accountability to ensure that it continues to be aligned with the business in terms of being right-sized and providing value. So whether it's all or any of those things will likely depend upon your level of internal controls maturity. So if you could just move on to the next slide at this moment, please, Chris. Thank you. So here you can see our internal controls maturity model. This provides sort of 5 stages of maturity, with each stage illustrating the key attributes and behaviors organizations should be demonstrating in order to be achieving a particular level of maturity. So we use this when working with customers to help them understand where they currently reside, but more importantly, where they want to get to and the required steps to get there. We don't perform those internal control assessments and strategy engagements exclusively for the needs of an S4 migration, I might add, but considering your current state and how you might improve will only reap benefits for your overall SAP control environment. And SAP systems tend to be material systems for most organizations that are using it. So you should apply the relevant level of due diligence around them. Now, at the risk of oversimplifying things, those organizations operating at stages 1 or even 2 are going to find it much harder to leverage controls for mitigation purposes than those operating closer to the other end of the maturity curve. There's not likely to be any formal frameworks upon which to fall back on to see what existing controls could be used. In addition, when the need arises for new controls to be designed and implemented, then who you go to? Is there a function that takes ownership of internal controls? Are the business process owners responsible? What about the potential use of technology in operating or monitoring any newly introduced or existing controls? These are all valid questions to be asking yourselves. The status of your internal controls is something that should be carefully considered in advance of your migration, particularly if a greenfield approach is your preferred migration method. But even if you adopt a brownfield approach, then there's valid reasons to do so. For those of you whose organizations, for example, are complying with the UK Corporate Governance Code, you might be aware of the newly revised 2024 edition, which will apply to financial years beginning on or after the 1st of Jan 2025. So within this revision, there's a particular provision, provision 29, which is requesting the need for a declaration by the board regarding the effectiveness of their material controls. So this is being seen as a core element now of good corporate governance and something which stakeholders will expect to see adherence to. You just move on to the next slide for me, please, Chris. Thank you. So the final area of managing risk that I want to cover is with regards to access governance, which is an incredibly important part of the overall control framework, and it's pivotal to ensuring a sustainable security solution moving forward to protect both your SAP roles and also your relevant mitigating controls as well, which you're reliant upon. As well as protecting what you've already got, it enables continuous improvement mechanisms by providing governance over your governance tool and the supporting processes. Now, you might have perfectly adequate JML processes in place, which is certainly an essential part of access governance. But there's also many other areas to consider if your security design and solution is going to be a business enabler, which includes empowering business stakeholders to take ownership of their risks and controls and move their thinking away from, well, this is just an IT thing. By involving them, it will strengthen their understanding of the underlying importance and why they're doing it. So reinforcing that message, which will in turn ensure it is more easily adopted and folded into their day-to-day activities, and then serves to improve their business processes. This is an area of internal controls and related activities and processes that you should revisit regardless of whether you're going greenfield or brownfield, as there's an opportunity to improve regardless. In terms of the typical access governance structures and processes that an organization should have in place under the umbrella of access governance, well, we've mentioned user access provisioning, deprovisioning, and changing user access as part of those join, remove, or leave processes. But others are also crucial. And some examples include role change management, ensuring ownership of roles and that role owners review, approve requested changes to their business roles with risk in mind as well. So that these changes are also analysed from a risk perspective. User access reviews, so periodically reviewing end user access for appropriateness based on the job that they're performing. This is made much simpler, by the way, if a business role approach has been taken. Periodic rule set reviews. After all, this is the most important artifact to ensure you continue to define and measure risk completely and accurately. So it's always a good idea to reflect on your rule set content at least once a year to ensure it's still right-sized and reflects those risks relevant for your business, including risk coverage, risk severity levels, any custom transactions, for example, which may have been introduced over the past 12 months, etc. And the last example I'll touch on is periodic mitigating control review. Now, these need to be reviewed at least annually as well to ensure they're still appropriate, they're operating effectively. Have they changed so they're no longer managing the intended risks? Are there newer and better controls out there which should be mapped instead? All these questions should be asked so that you're confident that the risks are being managed sufficiently, but importantly, optimally as well. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the main body of the webinar. So I think we're now going to turn our attention to any questions that you've been asking during the session. So let me just have a quick look. Do Turnkey have a best practice S4HANA rule set for SAP GRC that could be uploaded in addition to or replace an existing ECC rule set? Chris, do you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I think so, Mark. I mean, it does sit in your area, but I'm fairly certain we have that S4HANA aware rule set, don't we? We have our golden rule set, which covers the common risks that you're going to encounter. And we've tuned it for the common way of deploying S4. I say the common way because often you find there are several Fiori transactions that will do the work of one SAP transaction. Mm-hmm. And you've really got to, I think the question said replace the ECC, but I think you need to merge it in, don't you? Because you're going to have possibly some transactional access, possibly some Fiori access. You need to check for both, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah, you're right. They can sit alongside each other harmoniously, and there's going to be elements of the ECC transactions that are still relevant going into S4 as well. But you're right. It's about. I think it's our golden rule set. We've built on that over years with experience working with customers, helping them with their migrations, and it's those common elements where we've seen that they come up time and time again, which we've added into that. Obviously, there's always going to be certain specific differences from one customer to another. They just need to be taken into consideration on those given engagements. But certainly, I think we've helped to do some of the legwork already for organisations in preparing that ready-to-go rule set. Okay, in terms of another question, as you mentioned earlier, Chris, around architectural changes, there's a question around what kind of architectural changes you're referring to when it comes to an S4HANA migration. Right,
yeah, so I was going to put in a very complicated slide, but I thought it was probably a little bit overkill for today. One of the things that many organizations would have probably done already is the move from the individual customer and vendor records to the business partner construct. That's one technical change that you have to consider. The other change is you now have one unified ledger in SAP. You used to have a financial ledger and a sales ledger and a material ledger. It's now the same unified ledger. So you're going to have some changes there. Process-wise, we talked about the fact that you've probably moved to Ariba or Concur and possibly SuccessFactors. If you haven't, if you've got HR on ECC, yeah, whilst there is an HC for 4, there's a plan to put HR into S4, for example. Mm-hmm. People have often moved out to that. That's changed your landscape. So if you haven't tackled any of your SAP landscape, there are some system changes that are likely to happen there. If you're using warehouse management, you can now run embedded warehouse management on the S4 core rather than having a separate system. And one of the big changes you see, particularly with some of the intelligent Fiori tiles, is the analytical tile. So you can have embedded analytics actually on the Fiori desktop, which might do away with some of the BW access that you need. You might even do away with the BW system. And even to a certain extent, people could move away from a separate BW instance and move to SAP Analytics Cloud, for example. Mm-hmm. So those are just some of the things that happen because the S4HANA, well, the HANA database that you're running on is much more powerful and can do much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a good point you mentioned about, potentially people adopting those SAP cloud applications as well, like Ariba Concur, because then that poses I'm thinking from a risk and controls perspective, and access governance in particular, the need to be able to govern those environments as well. So widen your access governance to those cloud applications, and things like SAP IAG solution can support in that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because we've had a question about, do you have to go with IAG when you move to S4HANA?
So no, you don't have to do that. Is the answer to that? You can still manage your access risk. You can still perform your access governance activities using your on-prem, SAP GRC 12 system as well. So that's perfectly valid to do that. Similarly with SuccessFactors also as well. Some of those other applications we're mentioning, the cloud-based applications, then that's where you will need the ability to connect to those, something in between connecting your main access governance hub, and that's where something like SAP IAG or other solutions out there which provide those connectors to support that as well. And then we have one around validation rules. So I'll just read out the question for you, Chris. So we use validation rules on SAP ECC to supplement the authorizations. Do validations migrate to S4HANA, and do they exist in S4HANA?
I will have to probably research this a little bit more, but I would say, depending on the migration path, if they did exist and you went brownfield, they would be brought forward. But if you went greenfield, because it's a new implementation, we'd have to re-implement them. I'll need to check exactly what's involved in actually seeing if they're still there, and if they're not there, what the alternative is. I can't believe SAP have lost any functionality in the move to S4. So what we'll do for that one is we'll make sure we get the proper answer rather than second guessing it now, or rather not giving the full story now. Well, let's get the right answer there.
Yeah. So if Greg wants to get in contact, and we can provide some further details on that one, certainly. Okay, I think that's all the questions answered now, Chris.
We could have a last call for any questions.
Yeah, if there's anything else, please let us know.
If not, we've got another one that has just popped in the last minute.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is to do with GRC for S4HANA being version 12. Is that the same as the version 12 we currently have?
Okay. I am going to.
I believe it is. Yeah. Although there are plans afoot for a new version of GRC coming out in 2026, I think, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the roadmap was released sort of very, very recently.
Yeah. So the quick answer is I know that we have got S4HANA systems talking to GRC12.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that is exactly the same as what people are running on-prem at the moment. If you've got, I think the new architecture will go for that HANA core underneath it. So even though it's running at the moment on a HANA appliance and a HANA database, I don't think they've reworked the data structures in GRC12 to fully exploit the HANA platform, mm-hmm. which is what I believe is coming in the 2026 release, whatever that's going to be called.
Yeah.
But again, we'll get a decent answer for that one.
Absolutely. So Angela, if you wanted to drop us a note, feel free to, and I'll get somebody far more qualified than myself, one of my GRC architects, to give you a definitive answer on that one.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all we've got in the questions and answers. Just takes me to just thank you all once again for your time today. As we said, these slides plus the details of the Q&A will be being sent out to you in the next day or so. And as always, if there's anything else that you want an answer to or help with, here are contact details. And I would just say good luck on your S4HANA journeys whenever they start. If you're in the middle of them, good luck on that journey if you're about to start them. Hopefully we've given you some insight for what you need to be aware of. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, best of luck and thanks for listening. Cheers, Chris.
Cheers, Mark. Thanks.